Unaware his wife was pregnant with twins and had just inherited the very company funding his $20 billion deal, Ethan signed the divorce papers with a proud smirk, believing he'd upgraded by marrying her best friend. But as champagne glasses clinked at his new wedding, whispers began spreading of a woman he once called ordinary, now seated on a throne of power he could never buy. She wasn't weeping, she was building, and when her name appeared beside his deal's signature line, every investor turned their heads. How did the woman he cast aside become the force behind his empire? What secret move was she about to make that would shock them all, forever? The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos in her heart. Rain drummed against the tall windows as Clara stood still, the faint reflection of her pale face blending with the lightning beyond. The finality of the signed papers rested on the table behind her, his name boldly scrawled across them. Ethan Wellington, the man who had once promised her forever. Now that promise lay broken, folded neatly beside her untouched cup of tea. He hadn't even looked back when he left. His last words were colder than the thunder that followed him. "You can't give me what I need, Clara. I need a legacy, not a ghost of one." The words replayed in her mind like a cruel song. The barren woman, that's what he'd called her. Barren, as though her worth began and ended in a cradle that never came. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly, unaware that beneath her palm, 3 fragile heartbeats already danced in secret. A miracle she had begged the heavens for, arriving only after he'd thrown her away. She closed her eyes, whispering to the silent room, "You'll never know what you just lost." The house was too quiet now. Every portrait, every polished surface seemed to mock her, his laughter still echoing faintly through its halls. She moved slowly toward the window, her white nightgown brushing the floor like mist. Outside, Ethan's car sped away into the rain, his taillights glowing like 2 distant eyes of a devil who had won. But she didn't cry. Not tonight. The storm outside would do the crying for her. The phone rang, a sharp, jarring sound that sliced through her stillness. Her heart lurched when she saw the name flashing across the screen. Dr. Miles. She hesitated, then answered. The doctor's voice was gentle, careful, as though he already knew her soul was breaking. "Clara, I know this may come as a surprise, but you're pregnant." The world seemed to stop. She gripped the phone tighter, her pulse roaring in her ears. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Ethan and we tried for years." He said, "I understand," the doctor said softly, "but it's true. You're about 10 weeks along, and Clara, it's triplets." The phone nearly slipped from her hand. A laugh broke from her chest, part disbelief, part heartbreak. Triplets. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The very thing he divorced her for, the one dream she thought she'd buried, had come to life in the quiet after his betrayal. She hung up and sank to the floor, not in despair, but in something deeper, a strange, awakening calm. The thunder rolled, low and steady, like an ancient drum beat announcing the beginning of something greater. Hours later, she stood before the mirror again. Her reflection no longer a ghost, but a spark. The doorbell rang, and she turned to find her father's attorney, his expression grim beneath his dripping umbrella. She hadn't even known her father had been ill. The news hit her harder than Ethan's betrayal ever could. By morning, her father was gone. 2 days later, she sat in the oak-paneled reading room of the Wellington estate, surrounded by suits and sorrow. The will was brief but devastatingly clear. Everything her father owned, including controlling shares in Wellington Holdings, the very company tied to Ethan's billion-dollar ambitions, now belonged solely to her. Ethan didn't know yet, but when he did, the earth beneath his arrogance would shake. She sat there quiet, her hand resting on her belly once more. "We'll be fine," she murmured to the life growing within her. "He took my love, but he'll never take my name." As the lawyer left, she walked to the window once more, watching lightning tear across the night sky. The world saw her as a woman undone, a barren wife discarded. But what they didn't know was that storms never destroy themselves. They rebuild in silence. They gather power. And when they return, they do not knock. They strike. Her silence that night wasn't weakness. It was strategy. She didn't call Ethan. She didn't tell him about the babies. Instead, she picked up her father's pen and signed her new life into motion, a new name, a new city, a new destiny waiting beyond the storm. The rain finally stopped, but her eyes did not soften. Somewhere far away, Ethan was probably laughing, toasting his freedom with the woman who had once been her closest friend. He believed he'd won. He believed he was free from the barren woman who had chained him to disappointment. But Clara knew the truth now. Freedom was a mirror, fragile, deceptive, and easily shattered. And one day soon, he would see his reflection in the shards she left behind. The rain had long stopped, but in Clara's world, it had only just begun. Months bled into silence. No calls, no visits, not even a whisper of her name in the papers. Ethan had erased her with the same ease he had erased his vows, parading through social circles with his new bride, her former best friend Laurel. Their pictures flooded the tabloids, Ethan's smile bright and victorious, Laurel's eyes gleaming with the thrill of triumph. But behind the facade of their glittering life, Clara was vanishing. Not disappearing in defeat, but dissolving into something unrecognizable, into power, into calm, into fire. She left the Wellington estate the morning after her father's burial, her car rolling quietly away before the sun rose. No servants, no farewells, no trace. She drove through cities until her name meant nothing to anyone, until the memories blurred into the fog on her windshield. In a quiet town 2 states away, she rented a small home under a different name, Elena Rhodes. The alias felt strange at first, but soon it became her shield. She cut her hair, learned to walk without the weight of heartbreak, and began investing small portions of her inheritance through anonymous accounts. Every dollar was placed with precision. Tech startups, pharmaceuticals, sustainable energy. She studied the markets, made strategic calls at midnight, and built networks through encrypted emails and whispered introductions. When the pain threatened to drown her, she reminded herself of the 3 reasons she couldn't afford to break. The soft flutter she had felt beneath her ribs, the quiet rhythm of 3 lives entwined with hers. She often sat by the window at night, one hand on her growing belly, the other tracing names in the condensation. She didn't know if they would have his eyes, but she prayed they would have her strength. The pregnancy was hard. Weeks of exhaustion, nights spent alone on the cold bathroom floor, mornings of quiet tears she refused to call weakness. She had once been a woman defined by what she couldn't give. Now she was building a legacy with every heartbeat inside her. When the contractions came, the storm returned, just as it had the night he left. She gave birth in a private hospital under her new name, surrounded by strangers who didn't know her story. 3 perfect cries filled the room, 2 boys and a girl. The doctor smiled and said, "They're healthy, Elena. Miracles, all of them." Miracles. She had stopped believing in those, yet here they were, proof that the barren woman had bloomed. In the following years, Elena Rhodes became a quiet legend in the financial world. Her investments multiplied, her portfolio expanded faster than anyone expected. She built trust with influential figures who valued her mystery. No one knew her past, only her precision, her calm, her unshakable intuition. She never attended interviews, never appeared in photographs. To most, she was a name whispered in corridors of power, a ghost who made fortunes appear. But to 3 little children growing up under her roof, she was simply Mama. Their laughter filled her home, their drawings covered her walls, their giggles replaced the hollow silence that once lived in her chest. Each morning she watched them play and thought of Ethan, not with longing, but with a quiet kind of pity. He had traded love for ambition, warmth for applause, her heart for hollow crowns, and he didn't even know that his true legacy was running barefoot through her garden. When the twins turned 5 and their sister 4, Elena received an invitation that made her blood run cold. Wellington Holdings' 50th anniversary gala. The same empire her father had built, the same company Ethan had once sworn would make him untouchable. The invitation came embossed with gold, her father's crest still at the top. Beneath it, in bold letters, in partnership with Ethan Wellington. Her pulse slowed. So he was still feeding on the legacy he never earned. still drunk on the illusion of control. But control was a fickle thing. It shifted when you weren't watching. That night, as her children slept, she unlocked the vault of her inheritance for the first time in years. The papers were still there. Legal documents, share certificates, all bearing her father's signature. She had never claimed them publicly, never used her authority. But maybe it was time. Not for vengeance, no, that was too simple. This was about truth, about balance. She poured herself a glass of red wine, the color deep as blood under the light, and stared at the papers. Her reflection wavered in the glass. Clara Wellington was gone. She had died the night her husband called her barren. But Eleanor Rhodes, she was something else entirely. Outside, thunder murmured across the horizon again. The storm was returning. In the days that followed, Eleanor moved quietly. She reached out to her father's old lawyer, Thomas Hale, the only man who had ever looked at her with genuine respect. Together, they reviewed the will, tracing every clause that tied her inheritance to Wellington Holdings. The result was clear. She owned more of the company than anyone alive. Thomas looked at her with quiet awe. You could take the entire board down with one word. She smiled faintly. I don't want to take them down, she said. Not yet. I want to watch them trip first. And so she waited. Years passed, and the world came to know Elena Rhodes as a poised, wealthy investor, often seen beside powerful men, but never claimed by any. When she married her second husband, a handsome, calculating magnate named Victor Moreau, it wasn't for love, but for leverage. The marriage gave her access to global circles of influence. He loved her beauty, envied her mystery, and underestimated her completely. What he didn't know was that beneath the diamonds and poise lived a storm long waiting to strike. The ballroom shimmered like a dream built on deceit. Crystal chandeliers glittered above a sea of silk gowns and tailored suits, laughter rippling through the crowd like polished glass. Cameras flashed as reporters captured smiles that meant nothing, alliances sealed in champagne rather than trust. The Wellington Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the business world's calendar, and tonight all eyes were on one woman. Elena Moreau, wife of the influential Victor Moreau, silent investor, whispered enigma. She glided through the entrance on Victor's arm, her gown a deep emerald that gleamed beneath the lights. Her posture was perfect, her expression serene, her aura commanding. Years of silence had carved her into something unbreakable. She was no longer Clara, the wife Ethan abandoned, but the woman the world now envied. Victor leaned toward her, his voice low, rehearsed. Smile, darling. You're my trophy tonight. Let's not disappoint the cameras. She obeyed, her lips curving into a practiced smile that hid everything she felt. He didn't notice the flicker of something behind her calm, a storm restrained behind glass. Across the ballroom, laughter rose near the center table. Elena's breath faltered as her gaze locked onto a familiar face, the kind of familiarity that slices through time like a blade. Laurel, her former best friend. Her husband's second wife. And beside her, still as arrogant as the day he walked out, was Ethan Wellington. He looked older, but not wiser, the weight of ego resting comfortably on his shoulders. His smile was the same, a smirk that used to make her heart race and now only stirred disgust. Laurel leaned close to him, whispering something that made him chuckle, his eyes grazing lazily over the crowd before landing on her. For a fleeting second, the air froze between them. Recognition, shock, then disbelief. She held his gaze just long enough to make him uncertain, then turned away with effortless grace. That single act, denial of acknowledgement, hit harder than any confrontation. He straightened, jaw tight, his ego unable to comprehend her indifference. Victor, oblivious, was already shaking hands with the chairman of Wellington Holdings, boasting about his upcoming $8.4 billion merger. Elena listened quietly, sipping her champagne, noting every word. The irony was exquisite. Ethan was still clawing his way up the same mountain she already owned. Then, as if the universe demanded theater, Laurel appeared beside her, wine glass in hand, her voice honeyed and venomous. Elena Moreau, she said, drawing out the name as if testing it. You're even more stunning in person. I've heard so much about you. Elena turned, her smile poised. All good things, I hope. Laurel's lips curled. Mostly, though I couldn't help noticing your resemblance to someone I used to know. My husband's ex-wife, actually. Her words dripped with mock innocence, and the circle of guests nearby leaned in, scenting blood. Poor thing. Couldn't give him children, I think. Such a tragedy. Elena's pulse didn't waver. Only her hand tightened slightly around the stem of her glass. How unfortunate, she said softly, eyes glinting. Men often mistake fertility for loyalty, and end up learning that betrayal is hereditary. A subtle gasp rippled through the group. Laurel's smile faltered, her composure cracking. But before she could retort, she accidentally tilted her glass, crimson wine spilling down Elena's emerald gown. Oh, I'm so sorry, Laurel said, her tone syrupy. What a clumsy mistake. The crowd's laughter followed like hyenas circling prey. Victor joined in, chuckling as he dabbed his napkin uselessly at her stained dress. Don't make a scene, darling, he murmured. It's just a spill. You can afford another gown. Something inside her went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. She looked around at their faces, the polished cruelty, the shallow satisfaction of seeing her humiliated. She could have shouted, could have thrown her drink in retaliation, but instead she simply straightened her back and said, Excuse me. Her heels clicked against the marble as she walked away. The laughter faded behind her, replaced by murmurs of confusion. Inside the restroom, she locked the door, turned to the mirror and stared. The red stains spread across her bodice like blood blooming through silk. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she reached for a towel and began to wipe it away slowly, deliberately, her reflection shifting with every stroke. Less victim, more weapon. She spoke softly to the woman in the mirror. You've been silent long enough. Thunder rumbled outside. She smiled faintly. The same way she had years ago when the storm first came. That night, after returning home, she didn't speak to Victor. She simply stood at her dressing table, removing her earrings one by one as the events replayed in her mind. The humiliation didn't sting. It sharpened. Every word Laurel said, every laugh Victor gave, became fuel. When she lay in bed, sleep never came. Instead, her mind replayed Ethan's expression when he saw her. That flicker of disbelief, that momentary loss of control. He thought she'd been erased. He thought she'd vanished. But ghosts don't vanish. They return when the living least expect them. By morning, social media had exploded. Victor Moreau's wife humiliated at Wellington Gala. The headlines painted her as fragile, embarrassed, weak. Victor smirked at his phone, tossing it aside as he prepared for work. It's not so bad, he said lightly. At least they spelled your name right. She only smiled. Names are powerful things, Victor. You should be careful how you use mine. When he left, she stood by the window again, the skyline glowing beneath a rising sun. She remembered Ethan's words, her father's will, and the children still sleeping down the hall. His children. Her silence had protected her. Now it would destroy them. The storm had returned. This time she would be the thunder. The morning after the gala, the city gleamed with cruel indifference. Headlines still glared from every screen, the image of her wine-stained gown plastered beneath mocking captions. Humiliated heiress at Wellington Gala. Victor Moreau's wife melts under pressure. The online world thrived on her embarrassment, dissecting every angle of her face, every flicker of expression, as if her composure had been a scandal in itself. But inside the penthouse, Elena was calm, the kind of calm that came after the last tear had ever been shed. She sat before her vanity, hair unbound, sunlight cutting through the blinds, illuminating her reflection, the stain of red gone, replaced by resolve. Victor walked in, phone pressed to his ear, his tone crisp and confident. Yes, finalize the merger papers. The Wellington deal signs Friday morning. He caught her eye in the mirror and winked. And make sure Mrs. Moreau's signature is attached to the financial release. Elena's hand froze mid-motion. Her signature. When he ended the call, she turned slowly, voice soft. You forged my name again. Victor's smile didn't falter. You're overreacting. It's a joint asset transaction, darling. Just paperwork. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. You think I don't know how signatures work? He laughed, stepping closer, his cologne heavy with arrogance. You're beautiful when you're angry. But let's not pretend you care. You've lived comfortably on my arm, worn my diamonds, and played the perfect wife. Don't spoil it with questions you don't understand. She held his gaze, her silence steady. That was her greatest weapon, her refusal to react. It unnerved him every time. You should get some rest, he added, brushing her shoulder lightly before leaving for his office. When the door closed, she turned back to the mirror. Her reflection seemed to whisper back, You've seen this before. Ethan's smirk, his betrayal, his dismissal. And now Victor's voice layered on top, as if history were mocking her in repetition. Only this time, she wasn't powerless. Her father's lawyer, Thomas Hale, answered on the second ring. Thomas, she said, her voice low but steady, I need to see the Wellington Holdings documents. All of them. There was a pause. Something's wrong, isn't it? Something's missing, she replied. Within hours, she was in his office, the smell of old paper and coffee filling the air. Thomas spread the documents across the desk, contracts, partnership deeds, merger proposals. The more she read, the colder her blood ran. Every document bore her name, her signature, but she hadn't signed a single one. Victor had forged them all, using her legal identity as co-owner of the Wellington shares. The Wellington deal wasn't his, it was hers. The $8.4 billion merger depended entirely on her inherited control. Thomas removed his glasses, staring at her in disbelief. He's building his empire on your foundation. Elena's lips curved slightly, though her eyes didn't soften. Not for long. That night, she stood by her children's bedsides, brushing her fingers over their foreheads. They were sleeping peacefully, their breaths even, innocent. For years, she had built her silence around them, a cocoon of protection, but silence had a new purpose now. It wasn't just armor, it was a blade. The next weeks unfolded in shadows. She began quietly gathering evidence, emails, signatures, encrypted data trails. She contacted forensic analysts who compared handwriting samples, validating the forgeries. She recorded Victor's calls, collected witness statements, and compiled every piece of proof into a single digital vault. But revenge wasn't enough. She needed precision. So she built alliances. Men and women Victor had betrayed before. Partners cheated, employees dismissed, investors silenced. She reached out through secure lines, her voice calm, deliberate. They didn't know her as Victor's wife anymore. They knew her as the woman who could destroy him. Late at night, she'd sit in the glow of her laptop, her children's laughter faint in the background as she pieced together his downfall. Each email sent, each file decrypted, was a heartbeat closer to justice. Sometimes she'd glance at the framed photograph on her desk, her father's smile beneath the Wellington Holdings crest. You built something honest, she whispered. I'll make sure it stays that way. The storm outside mirrored her resolve, soft rain at first, then thunder rolling low, as if echoing the pulse of destiny. She stood by the window, memories flooding back of that first storm years ago when Ethan left her. The rain had marked both her end and her beginning, and now it returned again, heralding another reckoning. By dawn, she had everything she needed, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every lie written in her name. She stored them neatly into a single folder labeled Friday. That morning, Victor strutted into the breakfast room, skimming through his tablet. Big day coming, he said, kissing the top of her head absently. Once this merger is done, we'll be unstoppable. She looked up at him with a faint smile. Yes, she said, unstoppable. He grinned, unaware that the ground beneath his empire was already cracking. As he left, the sky darkened. Elena turned to the window once more. She had learned long ago that storms didn't announce themselves. They gathered quietly, unseen, until it was too late. And this time she wasn't waiting for thunder. She was the thunder. Friday dawned bright and deceptive, sunlight spilling across the city like gold dust over deceit. The day of the merger, Victor's grandest performance, had arrived. News outlets buzzed with excitement, cameras stationed outside Wellington Towers, reporters narrating the triumph of a man who had never truly built anything of his own. Inside the marble lobby, Men in suits hurried with sleek briefcases, security check badges, and the world watched as Victor Moreau prepared to sign his name into history. Only one person moved through the chaos untouched by it. Elena, dressed in a tailored white suit, calm and poised. She walked as though the building itself bent to make way for her. She wasn't on the guest list. She didn't need to be. When she stepped into the boardroom, the murmur of executives halted. Victor's eyes widened. "Elena?" He half laughed, standing from his chair. "What are you doing here? This is a restricted meeting." Ethan Wellington was there too, seated opposite Victor, grinning smugly over a pile of documents. The sight of him didn't sting anymore. It only clarified how far she'd come. He looked smaller somehow, still proud, still vain, but no longer towering. Elena's voice was calm, precise. "I'm here because my name is on every document on this table, and I never signed a single one." A ripple of confusion swept through the room. Victor's grin faltered. "This isn't the time for theatrics," he said lightly, but his tone wavered. She opened her portfolio and placed a folder on the table. Its contents were silent dynamite. Certified forensic reports, notarized statements, digital logs, all proving one thing. Victor had forged her signature on every financial document tied to the merger. Ethan frowned, reaching for the pages. "This can't be right," he muttered, scanning them. "These are the main authorization papers. Without these, there is no merger," Elena finished softly. A murmur rose among the investors, the air shifting from anticipation to alarm. The chairman of Wellington Holdings adjusted his glasses, his expression tightening as he read through the documents. "Mrs. Moreau, these are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," she replied. "They're facts." Thomas Hale, her father's old lawyer, stepped forward from the doorway. "All evidence has been verified independently. Mr. Moreau forged Mrs. Moreau's signature to authorize the transfer of her controlling shares." The boardroom erupted. Voices collided, chairs scraped, phones buzzed with incoming calls from nervous partners. Victor's face drained of color. He tried to grab the documents, but Elena slid them out of reach. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. She tilted her head. "Do you?" Ethan rose slowly, disbelief flickering in his eyes as the pieces connected. "You own the controlling shares?" She looked at him, her expression composed. "I inherited them. You were too busy celebrating your new marriage to attend my father's funeral." For the first time, Ethan looked speechless. The chairman stood, slamming his palm on the table. "Effective immediately. The Wellington-Moreau merger is suspended pending investigation. Mr. Moreau, Wellington Holdings will not engage with fraudulent partners." Victor lunged toward Elena, voice low and desperate. "You're ruining everything." She stepped back, her tone razor sharp. "You ruined it the moment you decided my silence meant submission." Security entered quietly, responding to the chairman's call. Cameras from the press, already waiting outside, caught the tail end of Victor's outrage as he was escorted from the building. His shouting echoed down the corridor, a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Ethan stood frozen, the reality dawning on him that the woman he once dismissed now held more power than both of them combined. "Clara," he whispered, almost in disbelief. She met his eyes, her voice calm. "It's Elena now." He swallowed hard, regret flickering across his face. "I didn't know." "No," she said, picking up her portfolio. "You didn't care to know." And with that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble in rhythm with the heartbeats of a world now rewriting her story. The silence she left behind was deafening, a silence more powerful than any vengeance, because it spoke the truth they had both tried to bury. Outside, chaos exploded. Reporters shouted questions, headlines flashed, investors panicked. Within hours, news networks broke the story. Victor Moreau accused of corporate forgery. Wellington Holdings suspends $8.4 billion merger. Stock values plummeted. Partnerships dissolved overnight. Government agencies launched investigations. By dusk, Victor's name was synonymous with fraud. The empire he'd boasted of was reduced to rubble before the ink could dry. Ethan's reputation, too, began to crumble under association, his arrogance now seen as blindness, his fortune at risk from the fallout. and Elena watched it all unfold from her balcony, the evening air heavy with thunderclouds. She wasn't smiling. There was no gloating in her calm, only justice taking its course. Thomas called her later that night. "It's done," he said. "They're both finished. You could press charges if you want." She looked out at the city lights, the hum of distant sirens echoing like the storm she'd once feared. "No," she said softly. "Let the world do the rest." Below, cameras still flashed as Victor stumbled out of the building, his perfect suit soaked by the rain, his pleas drowned by reporters shouting questions about fraud, betrayal, and forged love. Elena turned away from the window. The storm outside no longer frightened her. It was simply a reflection of her strength, loud, cleansing, inevitable. And somewhere in the downpour, she thought of Ethan again, not with hate, but with the cold mercy of closure. The man who left her barren had never realized she carried everything he'd ever wanted. The storm had spoken, days turned into weeks, and the empire Ethan once ruled by arrogance now lived only in headlines of disgrace. His $20 billion deal was dead. Investors fled. Contracts vanished overnight. His office, once a fortress of ego, was stripped bare, replaced by whispers of betrayal and bad luck. The woman he had left for comfort, her best friend, was gone too. She had filed for divorce the moment the fraud scandal broke, packing her things with a note that read only 4 words: "I won't sink twice." Now Ethan sat in the quiet of his penthouse, staring at the skyline that used to belong to him. Empty champagne bottles lined the counter. The silence mocked him. The phone rang with creditors, lawyers, reporters, none of whom he answered. Every night he replayed the same moment in his mind. Elena standing in that white suit, unmoved, untouchable, while his world disintegrated in front of her. Her voice had been calm, but her silence afterward haunted him. One evening, a news segment flickered on TV, her face appearing under the headline, "Elena Wellington appointed CEO of Wellington Global Holdings." The crowd around her applauded as she gave a poised speech about rebuilding integrity, legacy, and truth. Ethan turned the volume up, unable to look away. Her eyes, once soft with love, were now sharp with purpose. "This company," she said, "was born from honesty and vision, and no matter how many storms tried to destroy it, we will rebuild stronger, wiser, and united." The applause thundered through the room, but Ethan heard only the echo of his own choices. He thought about the nights he'd ignored her dreams, the mornings he'd left her waiting, the day he'd called her barren. He thought of her best friend's laughter beside his bed and realized how small he had been, how blind, how greedy. That night, driven by something between guilt and desperation, he drove across the city to her estate. The gates were tall and gilded, guarded by silent security. Through the bars, he could see the mansion glowing under soft garden lights. The air smelled of roses and rain. When she stepped out onto the porch, wearing a simple blue dress, holding 2 small children by the hand, time stopped. The twins, a boy and a girl, no older than 3. Their laughter rising like the music of a life he never knew he had. He froze, hands trembling against the wheel. For a moment, the world narrowed to that sight, her soft smile as she bent down to whisper to them, the boy tugging at her sleeve, the girl reaching up to touch her cheek. Then, as if sensing him, she looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. He stepped out of the car, drenched in the guilt of years, voice breaking. "Elena!" The guards moved, but she raised her hand. The twins looked curiously toward him, unaware of who he was. "I just wanted to talk," he said, voice shaking. "Please, I didn't know." She walked forward slowly, her face unreadable. "You didn't ask to know," she said quietly. "You made sure not to." His throat tightened. "Are they?" "Yes," she said before he could finish. "They're yours." He took a step closer, eyes glistening. "I swear I didn't mean to." "To what?" she cut in softly, the pain beneath her calm slicing through him. "To call me empty? To replace me before the ink on our papers dried? To build your empire on my inheritance?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth was too heavy. Elena looked at the twins, then back at him. "You lost them the day you walked out that door, Ethan. Not because I kept them from you, but because you chose everything over us." He dropped his gaze, tears streaking down. "Please, I just want to make it right." She sighed, her expression softening just enough to hold compassion without forgiveness. There's no making it right, Ethan. There's only learning from what's left. The little girl tugged her mother's hand. Mama, who's that man? Elena bent down, smoothing her daughter's hair. Just someone from the past, sweetheart, the boy yawned. Can we go inside? Yes, she said gently. Go on. The twins ran back up the steps, laughter echoing like sunlight after rain. Ethan watched them disappear through the doorway, the weight of loss settling in his chest like a lifetime sentence. Elena, please, he said again, voice cracking. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't live knowing what I threw away. She looked at him one last time. Then live with it, she whispered. The gates began to close. He stood there until the night swallowed him, until the echo of the gates locking felt like the sound of finality. Inside, Elena leaned against the doorframe, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd held. Her heart ached, but it was no longer broken. The twins ran toward her, wrapping their small arms around her legs. Mama, are you okay? She smiled softly, kissing their foreheads. I am now. Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, final. Ethan walked away with nothing but memories. Elena, however, walked upstairs to tuck in the two lives that had given her everything. She stood by their beds, watching them sleep peacefully, then whispered into the dark, You were worth every storm. And for the first time in years, she felt peace, because revenge had never been the end. Her freedom was.